America may soon be subjected to the country's first DEI president, Kamala Harris. Okay, let's talk about it. Conservatives are obsessed with DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, not solely because it is their pet fixation of the moment, but because it is a part of their larger commitment to roll back democracy as we know it. For months, the term DEI has been paraded around conservative media as a catch-all racial boogeyman, out to fundamentally change the American way of life.
DEI.
They have a DEI presidency that they can celebrate.
Woke policies in DEI.
Woke, DEI, ESG.
Because it's some DEI crap.
Said that they were going to focus on DEI initiatives over anything else. And that's what led to that accident. They weren't hiring people who were qualified to put grease on
I've
wheels.
never seen a single shred of data or evidence associating what happened and somehow trying to blame that on women and minorities.
DEI is 2024's woke, which was 2023's CRT, which was 2021's BLM, which was 2020's N-word, a transparently racist euphemism thinly veiling the bigotry they desperately want you to see. But what if I told you that some of these folks are intentionally lying to you about DEI? Not only is DEI far from some threatening society-altering scheme, it usually isn't even relevant to the things they're applying the term to.
Well, maybe they're focused too much on DEI. There's a concern at the FBI because they're dropping the FBI special agent requirements in the name of DEI. I'm just wondering if that has anything to do with missing an important drone that just killed 3 of our heroes, Congressman.
And that's what I want to talk about in this video. The lies about DEI, the misrepresentations of DEI, as well as the flaws and the limits of DEI. And since we're here, while conservatives are convincing white Americans that DEI is a threat to their way of life, some folks believe that DEI is barely a threat to the status quo because it is largely tied to the mechanisms of the status quo. There is a lot to unpack around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I reached out to some smart people. First, I called the only anti-DEI person I trust, Raven Rodriguez.
Hi, my name is Raven Rodriguez. I am a writer, researcher, and academic.
She's a former Ivy League DEI director turned anti-DEI justice educator.
If DEI posed a threat to the wealth or power of historically racist and problematic institutions, Mark Cuban would not be in support of it. If DEI meant that he needed to redistribute his wealth, he wouldn't be in support of it.
Her anti-DEI stance is far more Audre Lorde than Elon Musk.
The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Which means she's very critical of the ways DEI has overpromised and underdelivered for marginalized groups. I also reached out to my colleague, Tim Murphy.
My name is Tim Murphy. I'm a national correspondent at Mother Jones.
And has been following right-wing shenanigans for a while.
I think there's been a real shift over the last decade and a half, and Trump has really helped drive that shift.
Finally, I talked to my friend Omar. He's an educator and still sees the value of DEI as an important part of a healthy organization.
The idea that you're gonna get rid of DEI and it's gonna be a more equitable place is ridiculous, because DEI programs are meant to make the invisible visible.
They all see this in unique ways, but each of them have been keeping a close eye on the way the right is leveraging DEI and coded language to further marginalize historically excluded people. Here's the subtext for why the right is obsessed with DEI. Let's dig in. Today's video is sponsored by Ground News. More on that later. While efforts to dismantle inclusion in American society are as old as the country itself, the Supreme Court's decision to limit affirmative action set off a domino effect of anti-inclusion efforts from folks on the political right. From higher education to airline companies, conservatives in America have left no stone unturned in their efforts to undermine Black participation in society. And their primary vehicle for this effort has been advancing the notion that Black people are a threat. It's an age-old effort that bigots have been employing for a very long time.
I mean, resentment's an incredibly powerful tool. It's been an incredibly powerful tool since before there was the United States of America. And people have always played to resentment and tried to make people, resent other groups of people. And they've often reaped incredible political rewards for doing that.
In the current iteration of Black people are a threat propaganda, Black success is always, in their estimation, the result of some undeserved handout. And in their zero-sum framing, this means Black people are getting something that white people should have gotten instead.
Now, because of DEI,
When you see a black surgeon, you get a question in your mind. And what you want is you want the blacks that are on top, that do succeed, to be there on their merit.
But in states like Florida, DEI is now explicitly illegal. And decisions like these come with real-world implications for black folks across the country. According to a February 2023 survey, 41% of black workers reported experiencing discrimination at work because of their race. Black unemployment is at an all-time low. That's a lot of black people experiencing discrimination. But you wouldn't know that if you believe the stories pushed by certain news outlets, especially those that consistently depict black people as the beneficiary of special, undeserved preferential treatment. Take, for example, this article that I saw a man reading in a newspaper on a plane a few months ago. It's titled, "The NIH Sacrifices Scientific Rigor for DEI." I had time, so I decided to read the article. And it's garbage. It's misleading propaganda. Cornell University received a grant from the National Institute of Health to fund the hiring of folks from underrepresented backgrounds. The rationale for the grant is that Latino, Black, and other communities are facing health challenges, and the best people equipped to serve those communities are people, I know this is going to be a shocker, from those communities. Think about all the cascading layers of cultural competence one needs to interact with folks from a community that they never interact with. Segregation is real. At the time of receiving the grant, Cornell had just over 1,000 tenured faculty members, with only 21% of them being non-white. So the government, seeing this problem, extended grant funding to several institutions to remove all potential roadblocks to hiring people from those communities. The government is basically saying, do better. We'll pay for it.
Do better.
And Cornell did exactly that. They hired insanely qualified scholars, researchers, and practitioners to do the work. I know they're insanely qualified because I had time. I looked these people up. I won't share their names or research because I don't want any more negativity going their way. But if you're curious enough, the information is readily available and easy to find online. These people hold PhDs from some of the best institutions in the world. Their doctoral thesis titles alone were above the average American's reading level. But according to this guy, they didn't deserve it. They're only there because of some lowered standard. There's something sinister and racist about framing this as an abandonment of scientific rigor. There is something profoundly destructive about putting that headline in a newspaper to trick some susceptible old white guy into thinking the blacks are getting something they didn't earn. The research to see through this trashy, shocking, distressing headline took me maybe half an hour, which isn't a lot of time, but it's certainly way more time than most people have to give. Where we get our news matters, and it's harder than ever before to decipher fact from fiction, which is why I'm really excited to talk about today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that gathers related news articles from more than 50,000 sources around the world, all in one place, so you can compare how different outlets cover the same story. Every story comes with a visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And if you go to ground.news/Garrison Hayes, or use the link in the video description, or scan the QR code on the screen, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan. So much of the political polarization in our time has everything to do with how and where we are getting our news. 2 people could find themselves looking at the same event and coming to 2 totally different conclusions simply because they got their news from 2 different sources. Take, for example, this story about how Republican J.D. Vance has introduced a bill to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion in the federal government. This story has been covered by at least 39 sources. 13% of those sources lean left, while 67% of those sources lean right. You can also see the factuality and ownership information. For this story, 40% of the reporting outlets are owned by media conglomerates, which matters. You can even compare headlines to see how bias is affecting the framing. On the right, most of the headlines frame this story as a good thing. One headline even mentions that DEI, quote, only further divides the country, while another calls DEI programs woke programs. Meanwhile, in the center and left, most headlines are pretty straightforward. Only one really stands out. The New Republic calls Vance a Trump VP wannabe and refers to the bill as extreme. One of my favorite favorite features is the blind spot feed, which covers stories underrepresented by one side of the political spectrum, just like the story on JD Vance. If you lean left, you likely missed that story. I think Ground News is awesome because they aren't trying to change your opinion about the news. They're simply trying to give you more information about where you may be getting your news and help you see where you may have blind spots. Again, go to ground.news/Garrison Hayes or use the link that's down in the description or the QR code on the screen to subscribe today. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all their features. I think Ground News is doing important work, and I hope you'll go check them out. Thank you, Ground News, for sponsoring this video. DEI isn't perfect. It's a tool, an important tool, one that is tied to, for example, life-saving community interventions. But every tool has its limitations, and Raven has been thinking about those limitations for some time.
The language chosen, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is very intentional. It is very strategic. Let's start with diversity. One of my favorite things to say is that no one loves diversity more than white people. Why? Because when we talk about diversity, every second that we spend discussing diversity, we're not discussing decentering whiteness. Diversity inherently says this is our problem, when it's not.
Raven's primary critique of diversity, equity, and inclusion is that it does not go far enough, that it almost exists as a kind of pacifying force.
What we are essentially doing, or what we've been doing for some time under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion movements, is taking the labor, picking up the work that white people put down 20, 30 years ago and saying, we'll take it from here. And we're getting paid to do it. And so we conflate that with liberation.
Raven kind of has a point that diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't meant for sweeping change.
DEI practitioners exist in a really tough tension where they want to be radical, more radical, in their approaches. They want to be more liberation focused, and DEI is not necessarily designed to do that. DEI programs are meant to make the invisible visible. And we can have a discussion about whether or not in the whole they're doing a good job of that. But in this case, this is one of the cases where I think that this is better than nothing.
All of this makes me wonder about the future of DEI. Despite its possible shortcomings, I still think DEI is necessary. Equity and inclusion are worth fighting for. More than anything, what's obvious to me is that there is a cruelty present in the push against DEI programs. Group or race-specific problems exist, and they require race-specific solutions. Take as a final example, a lawsuit in California designed to stop a race-specific solution. For years, medical researchers have been sounding the alarm about Black maternal mortality rates. Black women die in childbirth at obscene rates, at least 4 times higher than their white counterparts. We know this. It's a real problem caused by a host of issues, like access to care, funds for healthy food, the ability to take time off from work later in one's pregnancy, the fact that doctors don't take Black women seriously, especially when they are in pain. Well, a group in San Francisco is working to fix some of these issues. These brilliant leaders got together to design a program to help remedy this specific problem. It's called the Abundant Birth Project. The program provides cash grants to expecting mothers, mostly Black and Pacific Islander women. They do so with the goal of reducing preterm birth and improving economic outcomes for these women and their communities. I debated whether or not this even counted as a DEI program, but it certainly seeks to disrupt the cycles of long-standing obstetric racism and make healthcare access more equitable. So I think it fits the description. What's amazing to me is that according to those familiar with the data, this program is working. It is measurably improving outcomes for the families who receive the stipends compared to those families who did not. And yet, they're being sued because the program is too specific to the people experiencing mortality most acutely.
San Francisco Mayor London Breed's race-based guaranteed income program are facing pushback from conservative groups.
Controversial, Kaylee, for 2 reasons. One, people receiving your tax dollars with no requirement they work? And secondly, should they be getting that money based solely on skin color?
It's hard to wrap your mind around how crazy this is. Being sued for a program designed to keep people alive. The organization suing the Abundant Birth Project, their name is the Californians for Equal Rights Foundation. In their lawsuit, they called the program a discriminatory giveaway, stating that it violated the Constitution and that it is, quote, illegal, wasteful, and injurious. How cruel does one have to be to see Black women dying in childbirth and then call a program designed to prevent their death wasteful? This is the insanity of anti-DEI politics. Regardless of what you think about DEI, the folks pushing against it seem to have an agenda that I think reveals so much more about them than about any of the shortcomings of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. These programs may not provide the sweeping social changes we need. They may have failures, but they are saving lives, specifically the lives most under threat. They are including folks who have been and continue to be excluded. And right-wing politicians and media are convincing the American people that that's a bad thing, which gets to something that Tim mentioned earlier.
I mean, resentment's an incredibly powerful tool.
People receiving your tax dollars with no requirement they work.
It's been an incredibly powerful tool since before there was the United States of America. And people have always played to resentment and tried to make people, resent other groups of people.
Should they be getting that money based solely on skin color?
And they've often reaped incredible political rewards for doing that.
I think what Tim is saying here is the crux of the whole issue. The right is obsessed with DEI because that obsession works. It's a part of a long tradition of powerful people pitting seemingly powerless people against each other. It is a politically potent strategy that works. This is what Dr. Ian Haney-Lopez calls strategic racism.
It's racism as a strategy. It's cold, it's calculating, it's considered. It's the decision to achieve one's own ends, here winning votes, by stirring racial animosity.
If powerful people can get poor white folks to blame poor migrants or Black people for all of their issues, they can continue to pay those working class white people unlivable wages. Poor people get poorer while the powerful can amass unbelievable wealth and are never held accountable.
Woke policies in DEI.
If they can convince the average Fox News viewer that DEI is somehow to blame for Boeing's failures and not conservative-led deregulation efforts, they can keep tensions high and people distracted and leverage that for their political benefit.
The problem is there's nothing to replace Boeing. Yeah. And it really hurts Americans' defense. It hurts America's transportation. It hurts America's economy. And the question is this about DEI? Are you not hiring the best people? Are you hiring the most diverse people?
When Donald Trump was president, there was no DEI.
They can run extreme politicians who feed into it, all while rewarding their corporate backers with tax cuts and deregulation. What I'm saying is that the right is obsessed with DEI because this kind of rhetoric works, but it doesn't have to. Okay, I'm gonna call it there. Thank you so much for subscribing and for watching. This was kind of an ambitious video. I wanted to talk about myths and lies and failures and broader agendas and pack it all into this kind of conversation. So thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think. I'd love to know what you're thinking. I'll be hanging out down in the comments. So subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts down below. As always, I'm grateful that you're here, my friends. Until next time, peace.